Previously on Media MD.
So this fortnight, I'm bringing you The Expanse.
I can't believe you're recommending a science fiction television show.
I know. I don't watch very many. It's set 200 years in the future. Humanity has sort of colonized the entire solar system. There's a sort of Cold War situation between Earth and Mars. Earth is now sort of controlled by the UN. I'm hoping the book explains better how that happened. Mars is so barren. All the Martians are always having to work together and fight to survive. It's created a quite expansive universe.
Yeah, nice time. Hello and welcome to Media MD, the podcast where each fortnight we prescribe each other a piece of media that we have somehow missed. I'm Reuben Morehouse.
And I'm Elliot T-Bold.
And this is our diagnosis episode where we are following up 2 weeks after you sent me The Expanse to watch. So Let's dive right into it. Now, because this is our diagnosis, this is going to be spoilers for The Expanse. So if you still haven't watched it and you want to check it out, go back and check out our episode from 2 weeks ago, which is our The Expanse prescription. All right, you've been spoiler warned. So I'm going to dive in with just like a very quick 1-minute summary, because I know you gave me a little general kind of story background summary, but I want to get a bit more in depth here. I would describe it as Game of Thrones meets space. So it's an ensemble show, right? So there's 3 different plot lines going at once, and my minute is going to start now. So the first plot line is there's a cop, guy called Miller, who's investigating a missing girl whose father has reported her missing. Her name's Julie Mao. She was on board a ship called the Scopuli, and we kind of see her at the start of the show. We cut forward a bit. We're following a pilot called Holden, who's transporting ice across the galaxy, and his crew kind of finds the Scopuli abandoned with its like SOS beacon going off. So Holden and a small kind of skeleton crew investigate on an escape pod, and then their main ship, the Canterbury, is like blown up by what appears to be a warship from Mars. Back on Earth, there's this UN senator, who's our third main character, investigating this kind of blown up ship that appears to be Martians starting a war, and her plotline kind of is following this conspiracy that unravels as Miller, the detective, and Holden, who was the pilot, kind of investigate this conspiracy from different angles. And Miller and Holden converge towards the end of the first series, and the UN senator on Earth doesn't really ever come into it that much. She's just kind of investigating from the background. So the kind of season 1 plot is we're trying to figure out who blew up this ship and who is trying to start a war between Earth and Mars, and maybe the OPA, which is this kind of terrorist organization, kind of freedom fighters, terrorists. And so it turns out, spoilers, that it seems like it's Earth trying to start the war. That kind of comes out at the end of season 1. I don't really know why. It wasn't super obvious. Maybe just to kind of fuck with Mars and the OPA. I don't know. Anyway, so that's kind of the plot of season 1, right?
Now I'm trying to remember exactly where the end of season 1 was, because it's not Earth. It's a specific corporation.
Right, yeah. So Julie Mao, who's the missing girl, her father was the guy who kind of created this bioweapon, which is at the heart of this conspiracy, right?
Yeah.
And, I mean, okay, he was obviously the one who was kind of doing a lot of this stuff, but from what happened in the show, it seemed like Earth and some UN higher-ups were pretty involved.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. I mean, I guess... Well, I won't say any more.
Stay tuned for that, I guess, in season 2.
That keeps going on.
Yeah, so I want to talk about, now that kind of basic plotline is out of the way in case people haven't watched it, I do want to talk a bit about like what the 3 different character arcs that I mentioned. So there's the cop Miller, there's Holden, the pilot guy, and there's the UN senator. Christian, that's it, with a J.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me because I would say the most stereotypical one of them, Holden, who is kind of the most main character of the main characters. He's the one that kind of gets focused on the most. He was probably the most uninteresting to me, just because he was a bit...
He's just sort of the classic hero character. No, he wouldn't carry it if he was really the only main character. Like, the other characters are really improve the sort of depth of the...
The kind of cop Miller is like this cop who you can tell thinks that he's like this great detective, but it kind of turns out that he's put on this case because he's expected to fail.
Yeah.
And so it's this very funny kind of like, he really is very arrogant. And then episode like 6 or something, after he figures out what's going on and he's like basically a fall guy, it starts with him like being like, what the fuck, I used to be a good cop, right? Did I? And then he kind of has this existential crisis. He turns into this really interesting character. He's just this kind of cop who doesn't really give a shit, but kind of finds this one thing that he is passionate about and kind of gets on the job again because of this. And this is a kind of archetype that we've seen in other stuff. Even in Guards, I'd call it something very similar to Vimes's kind of arc, where it's a cop who kind of is a bit shitty, but then kind of gets redeemed through this case that he picks up.
Yeah.
But, you know, he's a very interesting character, and he kind of has a lot of weird mannerisms, and like watching him kind of investigate this thing in a kind of half Sherlocky, half like, I don't know, Firefly kind of way is very interesting to me. And then the senator, Christian, is like fucking amazing to watch. She just has these great political like interplays. Her story is very bloodless and clean. It's just her trying to investigate very logical sequences one after the other in this very political environment, which is very fun to watch. She was probably my favorite to watch, actually.
Yeah, well, so that's probably a good point now that you've sort of talked about those different plot lines, because that actually ties into what, so like I read the book, and I was both surprised by how similar things were and also how different a lot of it was. So for instance, Christian is not in the book.
Whoa. Really?
It's only, there's 2 point of view characters. So basically the chapters alternate between being about Holden and being about Miller.
Wow.
So I looked it up and it turns out like Christian's introduced in the second book.
As a point of view character?
Yeah, and they just brought her into the start of the series. And that was probably a good call. Because jumping between Holden and Miller, you know, like you said, Holden's actually probably worse in the book for just being a bland sort of hero character. Like, they actually changed some of his backstory and things in the show. Like, the book went into his backstory, and he was actually just kind of even more of a bland goody two-shoes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and the show's actually sort of edged him out a bit, and he's probably even better in the show. And then Miller's actually even sleazier in the book.
That sounds great. I mean, the sleazy Miller sounds great.
Yeah.
The Holden backstory thing is weird. They kind of hint at it a bit, and then Christian, the senator, goes to talk to Holden's mother when they think that he's a terrorist. He was like born in like this commune as some kind of like land grab. I was very confused about what was going on there.
So that stuff was all a bit unclear, but more specific, like the real thing that they changed is in the show they sort of made his whole group of parents, because he has like 12 parents or something. They're all very anti the government, and they sort of live out. That wasn't at all in the book. They were just like, the only thing was, he has 12 parents, and that's kind of weird from a 21st century perspective. But all the anti-government stuff was completely made up. He basically just had a normal childhood, went into the Navy, then got dishonorably discharged, and ended up on the Canterbury.
Yeah.
It was particularly annoying because like it was kind of fun alternating between the Miller and Holden chapters because they'd often play off each other. So like a Miller chapter would end with like something hitting the news about what was going on.
What was happening from Holden's perspective.
The Martian Donager ship has just been like blown up, and Miller would be like, what? And then it'd cut to Holden's chapter, and Holden would be like on the Donager as it's getting blown up.
Oh, that's cool.
And so that was neat. But then from about the second half of the book, and I mean, you saw this in the show, like when they hit Eros and they're both sort of on it together, swapping the chapters' perspectives became pretty pointless because they were doing everything. And it was like just the two of them for ages. And I was like, why are we like following the only two characters who are together? Like,
and why are they swapping? Why are they swapping perspectives?
Yeah, so that whole bit where it's just Holden and Miller, and then you know how like Naomi, Amos, and all the rest of them sort of go through.
Man, this is going to make no sense if you haven't seen the show.
Well, yeah, there's a whole bit where Holden and Miller are off by themselves, and all the other characters are together going through the sewers and stuff, and that was all completely made up for the show because in the books you just sort of hear, they've left because we're just taking turns seeing the same things through Holden and Miller's perspective.
Weird.
But yeah, so like overall, I think I've heard the books get better, like because I did some reading when people like Christian were missing, but it does to me. I prefer the show over the book, which is kind of weird. The book does have strengths over the show. Like the book goes a lot deeper into some of the descriptions of like how certain bits of technology work, or just building the sort of depth of the universe, which, you know, because books can just always do that a bit better. Well, and then obviously belters are described a lot more extremely deformed in the books
than in the show.
Than they are in the show, because obviously the show actually has to hire actors and stuff. So like Naomi the belter, she's meant to be like just over 2 meters tall.
Oh shit! No, she's not disfigured at all in the show.
Yeah, so that was kind of interesting.
So talking about the books, I'm curious where the cutoff point between book 1 and book 2 is in the show.
Yeah, so the book ended at season 2, episode 5.
Right. Okay, so I haven't even got up to it yet. All right.
No, so Eros, the Eros incident happens about 2/3 of the way through the book. But obviously the show sort of padded it out a bit because they added Christian's whole perspective.
Yeah.
And stuff like that.
It didn't feel like it had been padded at all. It kind of had a good flow throughout the whole season, I thought.
Well, yeah, and so the writers of the books are also like consultants, and I think they help write the show. So
good.
All of these sort of retcon things and changes are presumably being
how they would have done it
by them. So yeah, I think a lot of it is them going back and being like, yeah, we should have.
Yeah, we should have just had Christian from the start. Yeah. Well, I want to talk about this actually. I said that the show has a good flow, and that's mostly true. Except you said in our prescription part, again, go listen to that if you haven't. That the first 2 episodes were slow, right?
Yeah.
I didn't find them slow. I found them very hard to follow to a weird extent. So, like, first of all, if you haven't seen the show yet, my recommendation is, at least for the first 2 episodes, turn the brightness up to full and turn on the subtitles. Because it was like, especially in the first episode, when I was still kind of getting my bearings, when you're following Miller, the cop, who's kind of going through this grungy setting, a lot of the characters will very quickly switch between speaking the belter kind of pidgin language and English. And before I turned the subtitles on, I just had no idea. Like, not even what they were saying, but even if they were, like, speaking English at the moment, or by the time my brain, like, caught up to when they were speaking English and when they weren't, I was, like, already lost in what was happening. So all of Miller's stuff, I was lost in the first episode.
Yeah, that's probably a good point, because especially the belters all have pretty thick accents as well.
Yeah. Which, I mean, it like, obviously it logically makes sense and everything. It just made it very hard to follow. And I kept having this weird experience where, so the Sci-Fi Channel puts up recaps of each episode, like had recaps on their website. And because I had such a hard time following the first episode, I read the recap of it, before I watched the second episode. And it had a bunch of information that I just completely didn't realize that I had missed.
Okay.
So, like, Julie Mao, you see her at the very start, right?
Yeah.
On this ship. And
I actually didn't realize that was Julie. So, just when I first watched it, it wasn't until about episode 7 or something, I think, when Miller starts having full-on visions of Julie, that I was like, oh shit, that's the girl from the start.
So
like, I'm an idiot.
So I read the recap, and the recap's like, we see a girl, her name tag says Julie Mao, and on the other side it says the Scopuli. Remember this for later. And then later on in the recap, it's like, and now we see a ship called the Scopuli. Ooh, and Miller is given a case to find this missing girl, Julie Mao, bracket. Remember, she was the girl at the start. And I was like, oh, I did not catch that.
Yeah. No, I had a lot of trouble the first time I watched the show, because I started to forget all the ship names, and then people talk about the Donager and the Scopuli and the Canterbury, and it's like, I don't remember which ones are blown up.
Yeah, and so from that point, I was like, oh, I should be reading the recaps. And then every time I read the recaps, I did it for like the second episode, the third episode, the fourth episode, and and there was always things that I had just completely missed. Like minor-ish things, but still things that seemed important. And they would sometimes be featured on the previously on in the next episode, and I'd just be like, I do not Like, did that happen? Like, I did not catch that at all. Like, there's one where in like episode 3 or 4, it's like previously on, and it shows you like a person looking and like clearly noticing one of Holden's crew members at a bar, and I'm like, I did not remember that. Like, who is that guy? Why is he noticing them? Is that important? And it wasn't important, so I'm not sure why it was in there, but I just had completely missed it. So yeah, I'm not going to blame that on myself getting distracted while watching. I'm going to blame it on the first few episodes being quite hard to follow in a lot of ways. But after it got past like episode 3 or 4, or about episode 3 is where it really started being a lot more clear to follow and a lot more like, I don't know, brightly lit, or they didn't switch between pidgin language and English as much. I don't know what it was, but it became a lot easier to follow after that. So if you're having trouble with the first 2 episodes, just kind of stick with it, read the recaps, and when you hit episode 3, you should be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like this show. I did like it. I feel like I definitely am glad that you told me about the kind of general plot setup at the start. Actually, I was a little disappointed with how much Mars wasn't really featured in the first season.
Yeah, it comes in a big way in the second.
Yeah,
one of the characters who gets introduced in season 2 is a Martian. Sorry, wait, and her name's Bobby Draper, and she interacts directly with Christian a bunch, and so she's really good as well. Like, yeah, again, the first book really suffers by not having Bobby and Christian in it.
Yeah, I mean, you told me about a lot of the Mars stuff, like how they're scientists and whatever, but that was like way more than we got in season 1. In season 1, all we got, there was one thing you mentioned, which is how they like are united as a people by trying to make Mars survive, and we get like one line hinting at that, and that's basically all we hear about the Martians in the first season.
Okay, so it must be sort of early season 2, because a lot of that was covered in the books, and so the book that I read, so yeah, it must be early season 2 that all got, well, that Mars gets introduced more sort of prominently, because I think really most of your knowledge of Mars early on in the show, I remember, just does come from Alex, the pilot, being from there.
Yes, although he doesn't give any kind of data dumps in season 1. He's just like, oh yeah, I used to be in the Mars Navy, and like, hey, here's some things about like codes they use, and that's basically all he does. I quite like this show. I quite liked it. I want to touch on one more thing that I really liked, which is, well, it was kind of weird because they didn't resolve it, but this is kind of a trope that I really like, which is the main characters put on a clock for something. So in episode 10, Miller, the cop, and Holden, the pilot, get like seriously bad radiation poisoning, and they seem like they're going to die for the entire episode.
Yeah.
They're basically trying to get back to their ship before it leaves, and they get completely fucked from radiation. And it's kind of not really resolved whether they're all right or not at the end, which was a little disappointing. I don't know. We could see what happens. I'm assuming they're fine, but I really like that. Oh, that noise is giving me something to think about. Yeah. That's just kind of a trope that I really like, and I feel like it was done really well. It can be problematic when like characters are like have that done to them, where it's like, oh, I'm going to die if I don't get to here or whatever, and it feels like it doesn't have a lot of stakes. Like I would compare it to something like Stargate, where this kind of thing happens a lot, but it doesn't really feel like there's stakes. But even though I was fairly sure that they're going to be all right for season 2, it still felt like there were stakes, which I liked. I appreciated it. And it kind of gave the episode a lot of emotional heart.
I think a big part of that, like the way the Expanse did it, is you could tell they were feeling it. Like they're coughing up blood.
Yeah, Miller coughed up a lot of blood in that episode.
Yeah. And I mean, because it's, it comes up a lot more in the book, like, because they're constantly comparing Belter and inner planet people's physiology.
Right.
And so that's like a big thing that comes up in the book, is like Miller starts to suffer a fair bit more
because
quickly.
He's a Belter.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I noticed that he was suffering more in the show, but I didn't kind of connect that it was the Belter thing.
No, and I mean, I didn't when I watched it either. Like...
I should have read the recap. I reckon it would be in there. I really like the show. I feel like like, even though season 1 clearly wasn't the entire story, it still felt like a good arc that still left a lot of questions and a lot of things open that I would want to hear about in season 2. And not just things like, who is behind setting up this conspiracy, but they even end the last episode of season 1 with this weird tag where like this bioweapon kind of forms a humanoid body and like abducts some dude, and it's like, oh, this is a sentient bioweapon now, and like that's going to be cool to explore, and all the kind of Mars-Earth relations and like Earth framing Mars for this war that they're trying to start for some reason, or not Earth, but Jules Pierre Mao or whatever the corporation leader's name is. But yeah, I really liked it. I'm on board with it. I'm gonna check it out for season 2 for sure.
Yeah, keep going with the show, because I think maybe I'll keep reading the books, but I don't know if I'll ever try and overtake the show, because honestly, so far my feeling is the show's actually better than the books, so I would stick with recommending people the show, which is a bit abnormal, but yeah.
Yeah. So I'll give it what'll I give it? I'll give it an 8.5 out of 10, I reckon. I reckon season 2, if it picks up, might push me up to a 9, but there's a little bit of stuff that kind of dragged it down at the start. So 8.5, I think.
Cool.
What are you going to give the book, out of curiosity?
Based on sort of that, like, because I'd probably give the show a higher because I'm super into it, but if the show's getting an 8.5, then the book should get an 8. I think it's just a tiny bit beneath where the show's at. All
right, so 8.5 out of 10, or 8 for the book, I guess, is pretty good. So if you kind of want to let us know what you thought of The Expanse, you can check out the Reddit thread on our subreddit, which is linked in the show notes. Next week we will be starting a look at a movie called Okja, which is a Bong Joon-ho movie, and we might be taking a look at some of his other movies like Snowpiercer. We'll see how we go. But yeah, if you want to check that out, we'll put up a thread on our subreddit, which will also be linked in the show notes. And you can talk about what you thought about Okja if you've checked it out, or what you might want to talk about if you were going to recommend Okja to someone else. Cool. We will see you in a week. See ya.